My name is Stephen Little. I'm the founder of Section 103, a licensed college apparel brand. It's been a side business of mine for the last almost 4 years now, but I'm a graphic designer by trade. So my professional life has been web and app design, but I've designed stuff since I was a kid. Just always loved it and started this a few years ago. So in my professional career, it's pretty much all been web and app design. But going back to childhood and then in design school right after college, I loved all types of design, but I really, for whatever reason, have always loved designing apparel. When I was in high school, I was in a band and I would design our band's t-shirts. When I was in college and we'd play intramural sports, I would design all of our t-shirts. And just always loved it. And so a few years back, some coworkers and I actually started a side project that was like a outdoor lifestyle apparel brand, and it kind of brought back that passion for designing apparel. It's actually how I found Danger Press. We used you guys to print some of those shirts, the few that we did make back then. But it kind of reignited that passion for doing that. And then fast forward a little bit, I was doing some freelance design work for the Georgia Tech athletic department. I went to Tech and had gotten to know some people in the athletic department and had the chance to do some freelance work. And a lot of what I was doing was t-shirt design for fan giveaways or for the football team to wear before games, things like that. And I had seen for years, online and message boards and social media, all these things that people felt like was missing in the Georgia Tech apparel ecosystem, namely like the official shade of gold, which was really hard to nail down, and some marks that weren't being used. And so it led to a conversation with the athletic department of, hey, what would it look like, or could I become a licensee? I had always read that it was really difficult, really cost prohibitive. You had to be an established, pretty big apparel brand already. And so they put me in touch with CLC, which is here in Atlanta, and they manage 90-some% of college licensing programs. And so I talked to them and found out that yes, it used to be a little more prohibitive, but they had kind of changed some things in the last few years that made it a little easier for startups and newer brands to get licensed. So ultimately, it's each school's decision whether or not to accept you for a license. So I applied through CLC just for Georgia Tech and ended up getting accepted, which was awesome. So as a startup with really only that little bit of apparel experience that I mentioned before, and have learned a ton as I've gone since then. So happy to kind of dive into that, but that's kind of how we started. I launched with a few initial designs. I had sent out a poll to a bunch of friends because I had gone to Tech and used that to pick the initial collection and really just guessed on how many to make and hoped that it would go well, and really just used social media, no paid any marketing or advertising at the beginning, and it really kind of exploded from day one, honestly. At least, in a Georgia Tech scale of exploding. Sold out of a lot of stuff, had to reprint stuff a couple days in, which was a good problem to have. Just learned really quickly what people wanted, and also had never fulfilled an order prior to the first one, so I kind of had read like this is how an order should work and hoped that it did when it worked. So dove right in and started it out of my garage and very quickly outgrew my garage. Emptied out our basement and moved everything into the basement. I have now outgrown that and moved into a facility and getting some help with fulfillment, like I mentioned, as we add these schools. So it's been really fun to see the growth and have learned a lot as I've gone. When I started Section 103 as this side project, I knew that ultimately I wanted to add schools to it, right? If it was successful and if I learned and wanted to do that. So I set out with the idea that someday this will grow into something bigger. So when I came up with a name for the company, I wanted it to sound like a sports brand, not a Georgia Tech brand, because I knew I wanted to grow beyond that. But I did want some hidden Georgia Tech meaning because I went here, it's the first school I had, but I didn't want it to be so obvious that it was like Ramblin' Wreck Apparel or something like that. So I dug deep and thought for a long time, and I stumbled upon this idea of Section 103. So Section 103 really didn't have any significance at Georgia Tech. It's not the student section, it's not the section I sat in, which is what people ask me all the time. I was just kind of looking for something I could grab onto, and noticed that in both the football and basketball stadiums here, Section 103 is at the end of the home team bench. And I saw that as kind of a metaphor for the way that fans view themselves as an extension of the team, sitting at the end of the bench. And so I kind of just went with that metaphor as Section 103 being, I'm part of the team, I sit at the end of the bench, whatever school you're at. So that's where the name came from. And so for 4 years, it has been just a Georgia Tech brand because it has been a side project, like I said, and I didn't necessarily have the time to grow it. And so as I'm growing it this year, like I said, I've been meeting with a lot of licensing directors and pitching them on my story, which is this. It's a crowded marketplace out there in college apparel, right? And you've got to be different. You have to have a differentiator. And the thing that I'm selling these schools on, and which they seem to be buying, is a lot of what I've done with Georgia Tech. So I mentioned some of the needs that I met at the beginning with Georgia Tech were those things I had heard for years that weren't being met. It's the right shade of gold isn't out there. They had unveiled this new word mark recently that wasn't being applied on apparel. So those were kind of easy, low-hanging fruit that I provided for Georgia Tech fans, and they were happy and loved it. But the thing that I've kind of done since then, and a little bit in that initial launch, is really dive deep into the history and the traditions and kind of the ethos of Georgia Tech. And it's easier because I went there, but really providing designs like the one I'm wearing now. North Avenue Trade School is an old nickname for the school that really only students and alumni would understand. So I'm looking for those kind of deep cuts, those traditions that every school has a traditions page on their athletics website or their school website. I want to go even beyond that. Like those are the cheers or the statues that everybody knows about, but I'm looking for something that will resonate with students and alumni and just, you know, passionate fans. So a good example is one of my best-selling shirts is a restaurant that was on Georgia Tech's campus that closed over a decade ago, but it was beloved and people that went here in that era loved it. And as soon as I put that shirt on the poll that I have at the bottom of my site for what should we print next, it was a runaway winner and it's been a top seller for me. So I want to do that for other schools, even though I didn't go there. And so I kind of told these schools what I've been doing with Georgia Tech and told them I want to do that with theirs. And that's what I've started doing. I've visited a couple schools already, really dove deep with some current students, with some alumni, and I'm trying to find those concepts that other apparel providers are not going to make for their school. So that's kind of been my pitch, and that's what I plan to do as I launch these schools in the next few months. In addition to the kind of deep cut insider knowledge concepts, a lot of what I've been able to do as a small brand that prints stuff locally here at Danger Press is kind of the hot market items. So a great example is our current football coach at Georgia Tech took over on an interim basis in the middle of the season because the previous coach had gotten let go, and he won his first 2 games as an interim coach. And so people were very excited. After a few years of not being very good, he had won his first 2 games, and he, for both games, wore one of his Adidas team-issued hoodies on the sidelines, but he'd cut the sleeves off. So he had this short sleeve, light gray hoodie, and all it had on it was a Georgia Tech logo in the middle. And I thought to myself, people are very excited about this new coach, and you can't buy that shirt at the bookstore, on the website, anything. So I worked with Danger Press, found a blank shirt that looked just like his hoodie, but already had short sleeves, launched a pre-sale the night of his second win, his second game, and had orders out the door a few weeks later. And it has still, for 3 years now, been my top selling shirt. So I tell new schools that as well, but I have the ability as this small company who prints things locally to turn around something right away. If something happens like that, I can have a pre-sale up that night and have shirts out the door a couple weeks later. So that's been a really cool learning experience too. So yeah, for the first couple years, my e-commerce site was the only place you could buy any of my stuff. And for the last year, I've been wholesaling to Georgia Tech, who now sells them in their official in-stadium shops as well as the official online shop, which has been a really cool experience, and definitely hope to do more of that with other stores, both locally and with the other schools that I'm going to be adding soon. It's funny, so my whole career full-time has been in-house, like you said. So I've been working with one brand. For the last 14 years, I've worked with the NCAA, so still in college sports and worked with that brand. And like you said, you know, the nice thing is you get to know that brand really well. You get to know the standards and the things you should use. So with the licensing, having one school for these almost 4 years, and I also went to Georgia Tech, so I knew the brand, right? But now I'm working with it, and so I know the colors. Danger Press has really gotten to know the colors, and we had to do some ink tests. And like I said, gold is a tough one to work with. So it's nice that once you kind of nail that down, every time I submit a new design, that's all figured out, right? We know if it's this kind of shirt with this color ink, like this is how we need to print it. And so I do have the freedom though to really come up with any design I want. I don't have to use their fonts always. I do have to stick pretty much to their colors, of course. They don't want me making a red and black Buzz logo, right? But I have the freedom to do whatever I want around and beside those logos, right? As long as I'm not violating any of the brand standards. So there is a good bit of freedom there, but I know I have learned quickly that it's a school by school basis. That licensing director, like what is their approach to things? Is it very buttoned up and it's always going to be this way? And sneak preview, I'm now working with other schools that I will be launching for the first time this year, and I'm learning that everybody's very different. Some licensing directors say, you know what, just don't break any rules and don't disparage the school, do whatever you want, and others are like, very buttoned up, it's going to be this way. Please don't change anything. So kind of learn your clients. So I am kind of transitioning now from that always working on one brand to about to be working on multiple. Yeah, so this will be a year of growth for Section 103. Like I said, it's been a side business for almost 4 years now, and I'm no longer with TNT Sports here in Atlanta, so it's kind of given me the opportunity to spend more time on Section 103 as I kind of figure out what's next, or maybe this is what's next. And so I do have multiple schools lined up to launch this year in the next few months, and so, you know, it's the same process where I talk to those licensing directors ahead of time so that I'm not just applying blindly, but when I essentially get a yes from them, then I submit that application, get the official yes, and now I have permission to use their mark. So same thing, I'll go through the CLC system and be able to submit artwork for all these different schools and have the license to sell all of those now. So the CLC is the Collegiate Licensing Company. It's here in Atlanta. It was established, gosh, I don't know, a while ago. So they manage the licensing program for most colleges. And so they basically handle, you know, the application process for me, and they send everything to the schools. And so once I was accepted as a licensee for Georgia Tech, what that means is that I have license to sell whatever apparel or whatever categories I applied for. So I applied for t-shirts, sweatshirts, hoodies initially for men, women, youth. So it's everything categorized by product type, by gender, age, those type of things. And so you select what you're applying for. So now I have the license to sell merchandise with approved Georgia Tech logos on that merchandise. But now that I'm licensed, I have to submit every design through the CLC for approval, and it goes right to Georgia Tech. So again, the school has the final say, can you print this or not? Not, they'll say why, you know, you're using this logo incorrectly, or you can't use these together, things like that. So now that I have that, every time I come up with a design, I submit it through the system, Georgia Tech says yes or no, and if it's yes, then I have fair game to print it and sell it and do that. So that's what I've been doing for the last 4 or so years. So when I first started college, I was going to do music. I was a percussionist and a drummer in high school. Wanted to work in the music industry, not necessarily be a performing drummer, but pretty quickly into college realized I didn't want to do that, more because I didn't want to do all the performance stuff throughout college. I was kind of done with that. So I just became a business major, more out of just like general, like, I don't know what I'm going to do, like most college kids, right? So became a business major, took all the business classes. The ones I enjoyed for sure the most were kind of on the marketing side, so I had a marketing concentration as part of my major. But I really, until that advertising class, and I wouldn't say like it was this light bulb, like I know what I want to do, but it kind of kick-started the whole, there's a creative industry that you can work in. Like, what does that look like? And that kind of almost unearthed, here's what I've always enjoyed doing. Like, you know, like I loved playing Roller Coaster Tycoon and just anything where you were creating things of your own. I love to create stuff, put it out in the world, and just see what people's reaction to it. And that's scary to a lot of people, I think, and I don't know if it's because I've done it so much, but to me it's just exciting. And so, you know, not everything is well received, but it's fun to create things, put them out there, and just kind of keep learning and repeating that process. It's funny, so I'm gonna date myself here, but like when I was in college, and maybe this was just my ignorance, but I didn't really know about graphic design or design as a career, right? I didn't even know that that was a thing I liked doing. I just liked doing all these things. I liked making websites, I liked designing t-shirts, but I didn't know that was a thing or a career. And so, because again, to date myself, the iPhone didn't exist yet. So the idea of like a product designer, an app designer that I've been for the last 16 years wasn't a career. And so it really wasn't until like my last year of college here at Tech, I took an advertising class, really liked it, and realized like why I liked it was because I was being creative visually. I was making the ads, I was making the concept, I was actually designing the physical print ad, and so I started talking to people and like dug into advertising and what are some careers in that, and learned there's the copywriting side and the art direction side. So then I started talking to, I got an internship at an ad agency and started talking to art directors, and then realized there were graphic designers too that designed things that weren't necessarily advertisements, and I was like, oh, like this is what I've always enjoyed doing, right? I was designing t-shirts for fun. I was doing all this stuff. And I mean, to answer your question about inspiration, I mean, I think for me, I've always been a huge sports fan, especially college sports. And so as a kid, the visual identity of sports was a big inspiration for me. I always loved team logos. I always loved team colors. I loved uniforms. I loved the field design, the court design. Like I would spend hours playing this NBA video game I had on the Nintendo 64, but I wouldn't play the game. I would play the create a team feature and design like the name, the court, the uniforms, and like make this whole league of fake teams. And like, yeah, I'd play the game sometimes, but I got sick of that and I would just create these teams over and over again. So that whole world of just creating stuff, especially in like the sports identity world, was always my inspiration and my passion. And I have somehow transitioned that into both a career working in sports app design, but also this side project of sports apparel. So when I was in design school, anytime I was given the opportunity to choose my project subject matter, it was always sports. So I did a sports magazine, I did a sports poster, all these things. And so that world has kind of always been my design inspiration, if you will. I mean, the nice thing is I've always had this entrepreneurial spirit. I've always created stuff, whether it was ideas, things, or even side businesses. I've notoriously made a lot of side businesses throughout, and some of them, you know, short term and some are still ongoing. I just don't have much involvement with them anymore, but I've always loved creating things. And so even though I've had a full-time job for the last 14 years that I love and is in creative and stuff, there's still this creative itch that I've had to create something of my own. And so I've always wanted to do that. And so Section 103 is the first one that has been by myself and really been this much of an endeavor. And so I've learned a lot about creating and managing a business, right? I had to do a whole lot of things that I didn't have to do with the others. Even just to apply for the license, I had to put together a whole business plan and marketing plan to submit to them and create the LLC and get insurance for the business and do all these things that I hadn't had to do before. And maintaining that side of things along with the creative, fortunately for me, I'm a very organized person, and so that comes naturally. A lot of creatives think it doesn't. They'd rather hire somebody else to do that, but I actually kind of love owning every piece of it and doing the finances at the end of each quarter and paying the royalties and like, I don't know, I even the fulfillment of orders. Like, I've enjoyed every piece of this company, and as it's growing, I am going to hand a lot of that off this year, but it's definitely kind of a two sides of the brain operation, but fortunately for me, I don't really mind either side, but I just have had to learn a lot in terms of, you know, creating and maintaining this business. And as I grow it and add schools this year and outsource fulfillment and stuff, I'm learning every day, like how much things cost and is it worth it? And do I need to just do this? Like, what's more valuable, my time or the hit that's gonna take to my margins? And, you know, setting prices and using Shopify. I have taught myself every piece of this for the last 4 years. And of course, ask for advice. Find people that have done it before. It depends how you learn, but I learn better from people. And so I've not been shy about asking people who have done things, how they've done it, the mistakes they've made, and also been happy to share my advice with people that are newer in it than I am. One piece of advice I always try to give, like student groups or things I've spoken to, is don't be afraid to ask people questions or even for something. The worst they can say is no, right? So throughout my early career and in current career, I've had really no fear in asking people for something that may seem like it's a bother to them or something, because most people are willing to help, right? Especially people further along in their career. So when I was an intern at this advertising agency, I started finding graphic designers and art directors and just saying like, hey, do you mind going to lunch one day? I'd love to just pick your brain on what you went to school for, what you do, like, and figure out what are these creative careers. And so that kind of helped me there. As I got out of school and was working, an example, before I was doing any of this freelance work for Georgia Tech and well before Section 103, because of my job, I was at the Final Four most years, and one year happened to run into Georgia Tech's new athletic director who had actually just started. So I introduced myself and I said, hey, I went to school here, I'm a designer, I have a lot of thoughts on Georgia Tech's brand, would you be willing to meet? And so like a week or two in his tenure as the athletic director here, had me sit down in his office for 30 minutes to just share with him all my thoughts on what Georgia Tech could improve and the consistency of their brand and things like that. And that's where I just think like there's no harm in asking. And if they say like, oh, I'll get back to you, and they never do, that's fine. Like, the worst they can say is no. So I would say don't be afraid to ask people. Another is try to pay attention to the things that you love doing. That may not be the most uncommon advice, but it's something I didn't do like my whole childhood and high school and even most of college, like I said. If I had paid attention to the fact that like, what do I want to spend several hours doing? It came down to creating things and designing and making things, but I didn't know that. You know, I knew that I made websites for fun, I knew that I made t-shirts for fun, I knew that I made fake basketball and football teams and video games for fun, but I never like pieced together like, if I have free time, what do I want to do? It was that. And I've ended up in a career with that, and there's some luck to that, but it's also, that's where I put all my focus and attention, and you have to have the, you know, the talent and passion all combined and opportunity into one. But I would say really just pay attention to the things you love doing, even if it doesn't seem like a job. There's probably a career, a job, either adjacent to it or right in that out there somewhere. And then, sorry, you asked like advice for creatives too. Imposter syndrome is real. I run into it all the time. I'll design something, I think this is the greatest thing ever, and like I said, I put it out there in the world, and even when it's well received, you get sick of your stuff, or you look around and see other people's stuff, and you're like, oh man, theirs is way better. And it's just real, and you just kind of have to power through and make more stuff. The more stuff you're making, the more that kind of goes away, and the more you, the better you get at it, and just know that no matter how talented you may be, you're gonna see somebody else's stuff and think like, oh, I'm not as good as I thought I was, but you know, power through. Everybody's got their own unique spin on things and voice, and you know, it's yours, so use it.